You know what's strange? Right now, somewhere in the universe, two particles are acting like they share the same soul. They're separated by distances that would take light years to cross, yet they somehow know what the other is doing, instantly, no delay, no signal traveling between them, just pure, immediate connection. Scientists call this quantum entanglement, but I call it the universe's way of telling us that separation might be the biggest illusion we've ever believed. And tonight, as you settle into the quiet of this moment, I want to share with you 100 calm facts about this phenomenon that will change how you see everything. Because understanding quantum entanglement isn't just about physics. It's about realizing that connection runs deeper than distance, that reality is stranger than we imagined, and that maybe, just maybe, we're all more intertwined than we ever dared to believe. So get comfortable, let your breathing slow, and let me take you on a journey into the heart of what Einstein himself called spooky action at a distance. Let me start by painting you a picture. Imagine you have two coins. But these aren't ordinary coins. These are magic coins that you and your best friend each keep in your pockets. You move to opposite sides of the earth. You haven't talked in years. Then one day you flip your coin and it lands on heads. At that exact instant, without any phone call, without any signal, your friend's coin becomes tails. Every single time. You flip heads, theirs is tails. You flip tails, theirs is heads. No matter how far apart you are, no matter how much time passes, that's quantum entanglement. Except it's real. It's happening right now in laboratories around the world. And it's so bizarre that the smartest minds in physics have spent nearly a century trying to understand how reality could possibly work this way. The first thing you need to know is that quantum entanglement was never supposed to exist. Back in 1935, Albert Einstein was furious. He'd helped create quantum mechanics, this new way of understanding the smallest pieces of reality, but now it was producing predictions he absolutely hated. The equation suggested that two particles could become connected in such a way that measuring one would instantly affect the other, regardless of the distance between them. Einstein couldn't accept this. It violated everything he believed about the universe. Nothing could travel faster than light. Information couldn't just appear somewhere else instantaneously. So he wrote a paper with two colleagues, Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, trying to prove that quantum mechanics must be incomplete. They called it the APR paradox, and they were certain it would show that this spooky action at a distance was impossible. They were wrong, but beautifully importantly wrong. Here's what makes this so deeply meaningful. Einstein's wrongness gave us one of the most profound insights in all of science. He forced physicists to actually test whether entanglement was real, and every single experiment, from the earliest ones in the 1970s to the most sophisticated tests today, has confirmed it. Particles really do become entangled. They really do maintain their connection across vast distances. Reality really is this strange, and sitting with that strangeness, letting it wash over you, is one of the most humbling experiences a human mind can have, because it means the universe doesn't care about our intuitions. It doesn't care about what seems reasonable or logical to our everyday experience. It simply is what it is, in all its weird, wonderful glory. Let me tell you about the second fact, because this is where it gets even more interesting. Quantum entanglement only happens under very specific conditions. You can't just take any two particles and make them entangled. They have to be created together, or they have to interact in particular ways. Think of it like this. Imagine a dancer performing a solo. They're moving freely, independently, doing their own thing. Now imagine two dancers who've practiced together for years, moving in perfect synchronization. That synchronization requires history. It requires shared experience. Entangled particles are like those dancers. They've shared something fundamental, something that binds them together at the deepest level of reality. And once that bond is formed, it persists. Distance becomes meaningless. Time becomes irrelevant. The connection remains. The third fact is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all. When two particles are entangled, they don't have definite properties until you measure one of them. Before measurement, they exist in what physicists call a superposition, a state where they're simultaneously in all possible states at once. It's only when you observe one particle that both particles suddenly snap into definite states, correlated with each other. Imagine two boxes, one in your hand and one on Mars. Each box contains either a red ball or a blue ball, but neither box contains a definite color until you open one. The moment you open yours and see red, the box on Mars instantly contains blue, not because information traveled from Earth to Mars, but because the balls didn't have colors until observation forced them to choose. This isn't philosophy. This isn't metaphor. This is literally how reality behaves at the quantum level. Fact number 4 takes us deeper into the mystery. The correlation between entangled particles is stronger than anything classical physics can explain. In 1964, a physicist named John Bell proved mathematically that if particles had definite properties before measurement, if they were just following hidden rules we couldn't see, the correlations we'd observe would be limited. They'd only be so strong, but quantum mechanics predicted correlations that exceeded those limits. And when experiments were finally precise enough to test this, they found that quantum mechanics was right. The correlations are stronger than any classical explanation allows. Reality doesn't just appear connected. It is connected in ways that defy our deepest assumptions about how separate objects should behave. And this isn't just theoretical anymore. We've tested it. In 2015, physicists closed what's called a freedom of choice loophole using entangled photons separated by over a kilometer. They used light from distant quasars light that had been traveling for billions of years to randomly determine which measurements to make. The choice of what to measure was decided by events that occurred before Earth even existed. The correlation still held. Think about what that means. The measurement settings were chosen by cosmic events separated by billions of light years of space and billions of years of time. There was no possible way for those quasars to have coordinated their influence. No signal, no hidden plan, no cosmic conspiracy. And yet the particles knew. They matched. They violated Bell's inequality with the same stubborn consistency they always do. You can't explain this away with predetermined properties. You can't chalk it up to experimental error or cosmic coincidence. The universe simply doesn't work the way we thought it did. But here's where it gets even stranger, and where many explanations quietly stop making sense. When we talk about quantum entanglement, we often describe it as particles communicating faster than light. But that's not quite right. In fact, it's dangerously misleading. Because if information were actually being sent between these particles, it would violate relativity. Einstein spent decades proving that nothing, no signal, no influence, no information can travel faster than light. And relativity has been tested to absurd precision. GPS satellites wouldn't work without it. Particle accelerators depend on it. It's woven into the very fabric of how time and space relate to each other. So if entanglement isn't sending signals, what is it doing? This is the question that haunts physicists late at night, because the answer seems to be, the particles aren't communicating at all. They're not sending messages. They're not coordinating in real time. They simply already agree in a way that transcends space, in a way that exists outside the usual flow of cause and effect. It's as if the separation between them is, in some deep sense, an illusion. This is what Einstein himself called spooky action at a distance, and he didn't mean it as a compliment. Einstein was deeply uncomfortable with this idea. He believed that quantum mechanics, as it was being developed, was incomplete, that there had to be hidden variables we weren't seeing, some deeper layer of reality that would restore the classical order he trusted. He was wrong. Decades of experiments have confirmed it. The entanglement is real. The instant correlation exists. No hidden variables are saving us from this strangeness. The universe simply doesn't work the way our everyday experience suggests it should. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. If two particles can be connected in this way, across vast distances, what does that say about the nature of space itself? What does it say about separation? About connection? Some physicists now suggest that space might not be fundamental, that it might emerge from something deeper, from patterns of quantum entanglement woven throughout reality. In this view, distance itself is a kind of illusion, a useful approximation that breaks down when we look closely enough. You and I feel separate. You're there, wherever you are, reading or listening to these words. I'm here, having written them at some point in what you call the past. There's space between us, distance, separation. But at the quantum level, the level from which everything emerges, separation might not be the fundamental truth. Connection might be. Every particle in your body was once part of something else. The atoms in your hand were forged in the heart of a dying star billions of years ago. The oxygen you're breathing was exhaled by a tree last week, by an ocean billions of years before that. Everything has been everything else. And if those ancient connections persist at the quantum level, if entanglement isn't easily broken but instead accumulates across cosmic history, then we might be far more connected to the universe and to each other than we ever imagined. Not in some vague poetic sense, but in a real, physical, measurable way. Think about that as you drift tonight. You are not separate from the cosmos. You are a pattern within it. A temporary arrangement of particles that were once stars, that will become something else, that remain connected to everything they've ever touched. The boundary of your skin is not the boundary of you. This connection isn't metaphorical. Right now, atoms in your body that were once part of Cleopatra's last breath are cycling through your lungs. Carbon from dinosaurs forms the structure of your bones. Iron forged in supernova pulses through your blood, carrying oxygen, keeping you alive. You contain multitudes not as poetry but as physics. Every 7 to 10 years, most of your cells replace themselves entirely. The you reading this now is physically different from the you of a decade ago, yet something persists. Memory. Consciousness. The pattern that recognizes itself as you continues even as the material constantly changes. You're less like a sculpture and more like a river, the same river, never the same water, and this river doesn't flow in isolation. The boundaries we draw between self and world are conventions, not realities. When you breathe, you're exchanging molecules with every person in the room, with trees across the street, with oceans on the other side of the planet. The oxygen you just inhaled was exhaled by someone in Shanghai last month. The carbon dioxide you're releasing will be absorbed by a fern in the Amazon next year. Your skin sheds 30 to 40,000 cells every minute. That's about 9 pounds of dead skin per year. Those cells become dust, become soil, become part of other organisms. You're literally, constantly becoming part of the world around you. The world is constantly becoming part of you. Even your thoughts aren't isolated events. Every idea you've ever had emerged from a vast network of influences, conversations, books, experiences, the accumulated knowledge of everyone who came before. Your most original thought still depends on language you didn't invent, concepts others discovered, neural pathways shaped by countless interactions. Originality is recombination. Creation is connection. This interdependence extends to species boundaries too. Your body contains roughly the same number of bacterial cells as human cells. Some estimates put it higher, more bacteria than you. These microbes aren't passengers or parasites. They're essential collaborators. They digest your food, produce vitamins, regulate your immune system, even influence your mood and behavior. You don't have a microbiome. You are a microbiome, a walking ecosystem, a collaboration of species that collectively produces consciousness. And here's the truly humbling part. Most of your microbiome isn't even human. It's bacterial, archaeal, fungal, viral, microscopic organisms that have their own evolutionary history, their own genetic code, their own survival strategies that just happen to align with yours. You're not the captain of this ship. You're more like the ship itself, providing the environment in which countless other life forms thrive. Every decision you make about what to eat, where to live, who to kiss, alters the composition of this internal ecosystem. Antibiotics don't just kill bad bacteria, they carpet bomb your allies, sometimes taking years for the ecosystem to recover, if it ever fully does. That gut feeling you get about people, that instinct, that intuition. There's evidence it's not metaphorical. Your gut actually communicates with your brain through the vagus nerve, a biological hotline where bacteria send chemical signals that influence your emotions, your anxiety levels, even your cravings. You think you want that chocolate bar, but do you? Or do certain bacteria in your gut that thrive on sugar want it, and they've learned to send signals that feel like your desires? Where does the microbe end and you begin? It's not a clear line. It never was. And this isn't some new age philosophy. This is microbiology. This is the reality that every honest biologist will tell you. There is no such thing as an individual. Not really. Not biologically. You're an ecosystem pretending to be a person. A committee that's convinced itself it's a dictator. Even your birth involved a massive microbial transfer. As you passed through the birth canal, you were coated, inoculated with your mother's microbiome, a starter culture for your own ecosystem. C-section babies, born into the sterile environment of an operating room, start life with a different microbial signature, one that studies suggest might influence immune system development, allergies, even metabolic health decades later. Your first breath wasn't just oxygen. It was an invitation, an open door to a world of organisms eager to colonize the newly available real estate of your body. Within hours of birth, bacteria began arriving from every surface you touched, every kiss on your forehead, every time you were held against skin. Your microbiome didn't develop randomly. It was seeded intentionally. carefully by proximity and contact. This is why the sterile approach to newborns, once considered ideal, has fallen out of favor. Hospitals now understand that some exposure isn't just inevitable, it's essential. The baby placed immediately on the mother's chest isn't just bonding, they're receiving a crucial microbial download. Breastfeeding continues this transfer. Mother's milk isn't merely nutrition. It contains oligosaccharides, complex sugars that human infants can't even digest. They're not for the baby. They're food for the bacteria. Carefully selected prebiotic compounds designed to nurture specific beneficial microbes in the infant's developing gut. Think about that for a moment. Your mother's body produced food she knew you couldn't process, because she was feeding something inside you that wasn't even you. Evolution outsourced part of your development to microorganisms, trusting them with responsibilities too complex for your own infant biology to handle alone. By age 3, your microbiome reaches something resembling adult composition, but it never stops changing. Every antibiotic course you take reshapes it, sometimes permanently. Every place you travel adds new strains. The person you live with, the pets you keep, the soil you touch when you garden, all of these leave microbial signatures in your internal ecosystem. You are constantly being rewritten by your environment at a level most people never consider. And here's where it gets truly strange. Your microbiome doesn't just process food. It produces neurotransmitters, actual brain chemicals. The majority of your body's serotonin, the compound most associated with mood and happiness, isn't made in your brain. It's manufactured in your gut by bacteria. This isn't symbolic. It's not a metaphor about trusting your gut feelings. Your intestinal bacteria are literally producing neurotransmitters that influence whether you feel anxious or calm, depressed or content, motivated or apathetic. Think about that for a second. The microscopic organisms living in your digestive tract are manufacturing chemicals that change your emotional state. They're not just passengers along for the ride. They're active participants in how you experience the world. And when you mess with your gut bacteria through antibiotics, processed foods, chronic stress, or a dozen other modern interventions, you're fundamentally altering the chemical environment of your brain. You're changing who you are, emotionally and cognitively, by changing the ecosystem in your intestines. This goes beyond serotonin. Your gut bacteria produce GABA, which regulates anxiety. They produce dopamine, which affects motivation and reward. They manufacture acetylcholine, which influences memory and learning. They create compounds that either inflame or soothe your nervous system. There's a reason we call it the gut-brain axis now. It's not two separate systems. It's one continuous network, constantly communicating through neural pathways, hormonal signals and immune responses. Scientists have done studies where they transfer gut bacteria from anxious mice into calm mice, and the calm mice become anxious. Same thing with depression. The emotional state transfers with the bacteria. Let that sit with you. Anxiety transmitted through fecal matter. This has massive implications for how we understand mental health. For decades, we've treated depression and anxiety as purely neurological problems, conditions that exist solely in the brain. We've prescribed medications that target brain chemistry while completely ignoring the fact that most of those chemicals aren't even made in the brain. What if a significant portion of mental illness is actually metabolic? What if it's rooted in the disruption of our internal ecosystems? I'm not saying bacteria cause all depression or that probiotics cure anxiety. The human mind is far too complex for simple explanations, but we've been looking in the wrong place, or at least not looking at the whole picture. Your gut is your second brain. Except it's not really your second brain. It's your first ecosystem. And here's where it gets wild. What you feed this ecosystem ripples everywhere. You eat processed sugar. Within minutes, certain bacteria throw a party. They multiply, they ferment, they release compounds. Some of those compounds make you crave more sugar. Your own gut is hijacking your cravings. You thought you wanted that donut, but maybe it was billions of microbes voting for their survival. Meanwhile, other bacteria, the ones that thrive on fiber, on complexity, those guys are starving, dying off. The ecosystem shifts, diversity plummets, and when that happens, your gut lining gets weaker, more permeable. Things that shouldn't slip into your bloodstream start slipping through. Your immune system freaks out, inflammation rises. And inflammation, as we now know, doesn't just stay in your gut, it travels. It reaches your brain. Studies have shown that people with depression often have less diverse gut microbiomes, that people with anxiety show different bacterial profiles than those without, that altering the gut through diet, through probiotics, through fecal transplants can actually change mood, change behavior, change brain chemistry. Let that sit for a second. Changing what's in your intestines can change how you feel about your life. This isn't fringe science anymore. This is microbiome psychiatry. This is nutritional neuroscience. This is the realization that the brain doesn't operate in isolation. It's constantly listening to signals from below. Your gut produces neurotransmitters. Serotonin, dopamine, GABA, they're not just made in your skull. In fact, about 90% of your body's serotonin is produced in your gut. Not your brain, your gut. So when someone says, trust your gut, maybe they're onto something deeper than metaphor, because your gut is sensing the world in ways your conscious mind never will. It's reading chemical signals, bacterial conversations, immune responses. It's sending reports up the vagus nerve like a constant newsfeed. And your brain, your supposedly rational decision-making brain, is listening. Not always consciously, but always. You've felt it. That gut feeling before a decision. That instinct you can't explain. Maybe it's not magic. Maybe it's just your enteric nervous system processing patterns faster than your prefrontal cortex can articulate them. But here's where things get truly fascinating. Your gut doesn't just influence your decisions in subtle ways. It can literally change your personality. There's a study from UCLA that divided people into two groups. One group ate yogurt with specific probiotics twice a day for 4 weeks. The other group ate nothing special. Then researchers scanned their brains while showing them pictures of people with different emotional expressions. The yogurt group showed less activation in brain regions that process emotion and sensation. Their brains were literally calmer. They were less reactive to negative faces. And this wasn't meditation. This wasn't therapy. This was bacteria. Microscopic organisms in their digestive tract changing how their brains process the world. Think about what that means. The composition of your gut microbiome might determine whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, whether you see a stranger's neutral expression as threatening or friendly, whether you wake up with dread or hope. And we're not talking about small effects. Another study found that people with major depressive disorder have distinctly different gut bacteria than healthy controls. Specific species are missing. Others are overrepresented. Transfer the gut bacteria from a depressed person into a rat, and the rat starts exhibiting depression-like behaviors. It stops seeking pleasure. It gives up faster when faced with challenges. The implications are staggering. How many people are being treated for depression with medication that targets their brain, when the real problem might be living in their intestines? How many anxiety disorders are actually gut disorders wearing a disguise? Your second brain doesn't just mirror your mental state. It can create it. It can sustain it. It can trap you in patterns you don't understand and can't escape because you're looking in the wrong place for the solution. And maybe this explains something else too. Why certain foods become comfort foods in the first place. You always reach for that specific meal when you're stressed. Scientists tell you it's nostalgia, association, learned behavior. But here's something they rarely mention. The comfort isn't just in the taste. It's in the ritual of making it. The muscle memory of your hands going through familiar motions. The smell that fills your kitchen before you even take the first bite. Your stress response actually starts calming down during the preparation, not after you eat. That chicken soup your grandmother made. You could order something similar from any restaurant, but it wouldn't work the same way. Because comfort food isn't about ingredients. It's about encoded memory. Every time you eat it, you're not just tasting chicken and broth. You're tasting being 7 years old, homesick from school, her sitting beside you while you got better. The food becomes a time machine. A shortcut back to moments when the world felt smaller and more manageable. Even if those moments weren't objectively better, just different. Just simpler in ways your current life isn't. Think about the foods you never eat alone. Birthday cake, Thanksgiving turkey, wedding cake. These foods exist in social context. They're designed to be shared. Your brain has filed them under celebration and connection. Eating them alone would create cognitive dissonance. The taste would be the same, but something essential would be missing. This is why people who live alone often stop cooking elaborate meals. Not because they lack skills or time, because food loses some of its meaning without someone to share it with. The effort-to-reward ratio shifts. A sandwich becomes not laziness but pragmatism. Why set a table for one? And yet, there's something profound about learning to cook for yourself with the same care you'd show a guest, about plating a meal beautifully when no one else will see it, about honoring your own hunger as worthy of attention and craft. The people who figure this out, they've learned something important about self-worth that has nothing to do with food. Consider how much of your social life happens around eating. First dates at restaurants, coffee meetings, business lunches, dinner parties. You say you're getting together to catch up, but really you're using food as a social lubricant, something to do with your hands during awkward pauses, a reason to be in the same space long enough for actual connection to happen. And here's the thing nobody tells you. The meal itself barely matters. You could be at a Michelin-starred restaurant or splitting fries at a diner at 2 a.m., and the quality of the connection would be exactly the same, because you're not really there for the food, you're there for the permission structure. The socially acceptable excuse to sit across from someone and actually look at them for an hour without it being weird. Think about how strange that is. We've created this elaborate system where we need a reason to spend time with people we supposedly care about. Let's grab lunch is code for, I want to talk to you but I need a context for it. The sandwich is just the alibi, and we've all been in that moment where the food arrives and you realize you've been talking so intensely that you forgot you ordered anything. The server sets down your plate and you're almost surprised by it, because the conversation became the real meal. The actual nourishment was happening at a completely different level. This is why breakup dinners are so brutal, by the way. You're trying to have the most emotionally raw conversation of your relationship, while also deciding between the salmon and the chicken. Your heart is breaking, but you still have to tell the server whether you want the dressing on the side. The absurdity of it would be funny if it weren't so painful, but we keep doing it. We keep centering major life moments around food, birthday dinners, anniversary dinners. We need to talk over coffee, as if the presence of consumable items somehow makes difficult emotions more manageable. Maybe it does, though. Maybe there's something about the ritual of eating together that actually helps us process things. The breaking of bread has been a bonding mechanism for thousands of years. It slows us down, creates a rhythm, gives our hands something to do when our hearts don't know what to say. You take a bite, you buy yourself 3 seconds to think. You refill your water glass, you create a tiny intermission in an intense conversation. The meal becomes punctuation in the dialogue of connection. This is why cultures that value slow eating aren't just healthier physically, they're often healthier socially. In Mediterranean countries, in parts of Asia, in communities where meals stretch across hours, relationships tend to be stronger, not because the food is better or people are inherently warmer, but because they've built time and space into eating that allows connection to actually happen. When you eat slowly with others, you synchronize, your rhythms start to match. You reach for bread at similar intervals. You pause conversation to taste something interesting. You wait for others to finish before moving to the next course. This synchronization isn't trivial. It's how humans have bonded for millennia, how we signal that we're part of the same tribe, the same moment, the same experience. Fast eating breaks that synchronization. One person finishes while another is halfway through. Someone scrolling their phone while their partner is still savoring dessert. The meal fragments into individual experiences happening in proximity, rather than a shared experience happening together. And here's what almost nobody talks about. Slow eating teaches empathy in a visceral, non-verbal way. When you slow down enough to actually pay attention while eating with others, you start noticing things. You notice when someone's quiet because they're tired versus when they're upset. You catch the small smile when they taste something they love. You sense hesitation before they speak about something difficult. You become a better listener not through effort but through presence. Because you're not rushing to the next thing, you're actually here for this thing. The meal creates a container for attention that spills over into how you relate to the people you're with. I've watched this transform family dinners. Parents who implement a simple rule: we eat until everyone's finished. No one leaves early suddenly find their teenagers talking more. Not because they're forced to, but because there's finally time and space for conversation to unfold naturally, without the pressure of someone checking their watch or pushing back from the table. The food becomes secondary. It's important, yes, but it's the excuse, not the reason. The reason is the time together, unhurried and uninterrupted. And time is what we're really hungry for, isn't it? Not just time on the clock, but quality time. The kind that stretches and expands because you're fully present in it. When you're rushing through a meal at your desk, 5 minutes feels like 5 seconds. But when you're sitting with someone you care about, sharing food and conversation, an hour can feel generous, full, like you've actually lived it instead of just survived it. This is why meal sharing creates intimacy in a way that other activities don't quite match. You're vulnerable when you eat. You're engaged in something fundamentally human and a little bit messy. You can't maintain perfect composure while trying to gracefully eat spaghetti or wipe sauce from your chin. There's a gentle humility to it, a lowering of defenses, and in that space real connection happens. Think about how differently we behave during working lunches versus personal dinners. In a working lunch, the food is truly just fuel, consumed almost unconsciously while the real focus stays on business. We barely taste it. We might not even remember what we ate an hour later. But a meal with friends or family, we remember. We remember the burnt edges on the homemade pizza, the way someone laughed so hard they snorted, the story that got told for the 100th time but still landed. The food becomes woven into the memory, inseparable from the experience of being together. And there's something almost sacred about feeding each other. Not literally, though that happens too, offering a bite of something delicious, sharing a dessert, but the act of preparing food for someone, of considering their preferences and restrictions, of wanting to nourish them, is an act of care that goes beyond words. It says, I thought about you. I made time for you. Your well-being matters to me. This is why home-cooked meals often mean more than restaurant ones. Even when the restaurant food is objectively better, someone stood in a kitchen, probably their own, and put effort into creating something for you. They didn't have to. They could have ordered takeout, suggested meeting at a restaurant, or simply not invited you over at all. But they chose the harder path. They chose the one that required planning, grocery shopping, prep work, actual cooking, and cleanup afterward. That's hours of their life, translated into care. And here's something we rarely talk about. Cooking for someone else is an act of vulnerability. You're opening yourself up to judgment. What if they don't like it? What if the chicken is dry? What if they're allergic to something you didn't know about? What if your signature dish just isn't good? But we do it anyway. Because feeding someone isn't just about nutrition. It's about saying, in the most primal language we have, I want you to be sustained. I want you to feel good. I want you to sit at my table and be nourished. This same principle applies to handwritten notes. In an age where we can fire off a text in 3 seconds, receiving something handwritten feels almost shockingly personal, because it required them to sit down, find paper and pen, think about what they wanted to say, physically write it out, deal with an envelope and stamp, and get it to a mailbox. All of that friction, all of that effort just to reach you. The message itself might be simple. Thinking of you, hope you're well, but the medium transforms it into something more. It becomes a keepsake, something you can hold, something that exists in physical space because someone wanted to create a tangible reminder that you matter to them. Digital communication is instant, efficient, frictionless, and that's precisely why it means less. Not nothing, but less. Because when everything is effortless, effort becomes the currency of meaning. The same logic explains why showing up matters more than sending well wishes. When someone drives across town to be at your event, sits through your performance, attends your graduation, shows up at the hospital, they're giving you something they can never get back. Their time, their presence, their attention. They're saying, being here with you is more important than anything else I could be doing right now. And you feel that, don't you? You feel the difference between someone who texts, sorry I couldn't make it, and someone who rearranges their entire day to be there. Because time is the one thing we can't get back. You can lose money and earn it again. You can lose opportunities and find new ones. But time, once it's spent, it's gone forever. Which means when someone gives you their time, merely gives it to you there, giving you a piece of their life they'll never have again. Think about the person who remembers the small things you mentioned in passing. You casually said 3 weeks ago that you had a dentist appointment today, and they text you this morning asking how it went. That's not just good memory. That's someone who was paying attention because they care. That's someone who stored that tiny detail in a world overflowing with information because you matter to them. Or the friend who knows you've been stressed about work, so they show up at your door with your favorite takeout and say, you're not eating alone tonight. They didn't wait for you to ask. They didn't need a formal invitation. They saw a need and met it because in that moment your well-being became their priority. These aren't grand gestures that get photographed and posted. These are the quiet decisions that happen in the mundane spaces of ordinary life. This is love in its most practical form, not the feeling, but the action. Not the words, but the showing up. And here's what makes it even more powerful. These people often have their own chaos, their own deadlines, their own stress and responsibilities and things demanding their attention. But they choose you anyway. They look at their crowded calendar and somehow make room. They're exhausted from their own day but still ask about yours. That's when you realize a real love isn't convenient. It's not something that happens only when everything else is taken care of. Real love says, I'll figure out the rest later. Right now you need me, and I'm here. It's the parent who works 2 jobs but still makes it to every school play. It's the partner who's terrified of hospitals but holds your hand through every appointment. It's the friend who hates your taste in music but drives you to that concert anyway because they know what it means to you. Love shows up in 1,000 quiet ways we barely notice until we stop to look. It's in the coffee made exactly how you like it, waiting on the counter before you even wake up. It's in the way someone texts you a meme at 2 p.m. because they know you need a laugh right about then. It's in the jacket draped over your shoulders when you didn't even realize you were cold. These aren't grand gestures. Nobody's writing songs about remembered coffee preferences or perfectly timed memes. But this is where love actually lives, in the daily practice of paying attention, of noticing, of caring enough to act on what you notice. And here's what makes this so powerful. Showing up doesn't require talent or wealth or exceptional circumstances. It just requires presence. It requires the decision to be there, to stay there, even when it's not convenient or comfortable or particularly rewarding in the moment. Because real love isn't sustained by the mountaintop moments. It's sustained by the willingness to walk through the valley together, through the boring parts, the frustrating parts, the parts where nothing dramatic is happening but you still choose each other anyway. It's showing up when someone's not at their best, when they're cranky or anxious, or dealing with something you can't fix. It's staying when the conversation gets difficult, when you'd rather avoid the confrontation, when it would be easier to just let it slide. It's the courage to say, we need to talk about this, instead of letting resentment build in silence. It's also showing up for yourself. Because sometimes love means setting boundaries, saying no, walking away from situations that drain you. Love doesn't mean martyring yourself. It means respecting yourself enough to honor your own limits while still showing up where you genuinely can. The people who love you well aren't trying to be everything to everyone. They're choosing where to direct their energy, and they're directing it toward you. That's the gift. And when you show up for others, really show up, not just physically present but emotionally available, you're giving them something money can't buy. The message that they matter, that they're worth your time, that they're not alone. Because here's what we often forget: time with others doesn't just benefit them, it changes us too. There's this reciprocal transformation that happens when you genuinely connect with another human being. You walk into a conversation carrying your own burdens, your own narrow view of the world, and you walk out different, maybe lighter, maybe with a new perspective you hadn't considered, maybe just reminded that you're part of something larger than your individual struggles. I think about the research on happiness, actual scientific studies, not just feel-good platitudes. One of the most consistent findings across cultures, across economic backgrounds, across age groups, is that the quality of our relationships is the strongest predictor of well-being, not success, not achievements, not how many items you checked off your list today. Relationships. The Harvard study of adult development followed people for over 80 years, and the conclusion was crystal clear. Good relationships keep us happier and healthier. Period. But here's the thing that makes this challenging: investing in relationships requires something that goes against our instant gratification wiring. It requires patience. It requires showing up even when you don't feel like it. It requires vulnerability, which means risk. Because when you truly invest time in someone, you're opening yourself up to disappointment, to hurt, to loss, and yet we do it anyway, or at least we should. Because the alternative, a life of efficiency without connection, of productivity without presence, is empty. You can fill your calendar, fill your bank account, fill your resume, and still feel profoundly hollow if there's no one to share it with, no one who really knows you. Think about the people you remember most fondly from your past. What do you remember about them? Is it how punctual they were, how organized, how much they accomplished? Probably not. You remember how they made you feel. You remember the time they gave you. You remember the conversation that lasted 3 hours because neither of you wanted it to end. You remember the person who showed up when everyone else was too busy. That's legacy, not what you did, but who you were with others and how you made them feel when you were together. And legacy, when you really think about it, isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in Tuesday afternoons, in quiet moments that nobody's recording, in the text you send just to check in, in remembering what somebody told you 3 months ago and bringing it up because it mattered to them. I think about my grandfather sometimes. He wasn't famous, didn't invent anything or lead any movements. But at his funeral, person after person stood up and told stories, and they were all small stories, how he'd helped them move, how he always asked about their kids by name, how he fixed their car that one time and wouldn't take payment, how he made the best of a terrible situation with a joke that landed just right. That's what people remembered, not his accomplishments, his presence. You want to know what legacy really is? It's the difference you make in the texture of someone's ordinary day. It's being the person who notices, who remembers, who shows up not because there's something in it for you, but because that's who you are. And here's what gets me. We spend so much time trying to be impressive, building resumes, crafting social media personas, collecting achievements like they're rare coins. But when you're gone, nobody's going to scroll through your LinkedIn. They're going to remember the time you stayed late to help them through something difficult, the way you laughed at their jokes, how you made them feel less alone. There's a teacher I had in 6th grade, Mrs. Patterson. I haven't thought about her in years, but she pops into my head sometimes, not because of anything she taught me about math or history. I couldn't tell you a single lesson plan, but I remember how she looked at me one day when I was having the worst time at home, and she just knew. She didn't make a big deal out of it, just kept me after class for a minute and said, "I see you, and you're going to be okay." That's it. 30 seconds. 26 years ago. But I still carry it with me. That's legacy. The small thing that becomes the big thing because it happened at exactly the right moment. The word of encouragement, the gesture of faith, the willingness to be inconvenienced for someone else's benefit, and nobody's keeping score. There's no legacy leaderboard, no point system. It's not about quantity. You don't need to impact millions. Sometimes impacting one person at the right time creates ripples you'll never see. I think about a teacher I once read about, nothing famous, just someone who taught middle school English in a small town. One semester, she had a student who was failing everything. Quiet kid. Didn't participate. She could have written him off. But something made her pull him aside one day and ask what he was interested in. Turns out he loved comic books, so she made a deal with him. Write me a story, any story about anything you want. He wrote about a superhero who could talk to animals. It was rough, grammatically a mess, but it had heart. She didn't correct every error. She told him it was good. She asked what happened next. That kid didn't become a famous writer. He didn't dedicate a Pulitzer Prize to her. But 20 years later, he's a father who reads to his kids every night, who encourages them to tell stories, who believes words matter. And he got that from one teacher who saw him when he felt invisible. That's impact. The kind that doesn't make headlines. The kind that changes the trajectory of one life, which touches other lives, which creates a ripple you'll never trace back to its origin. You don't have to be extraordinary to matter. You just have to be present, to notice, to care when caring isn't convenient. Here's something else I've learned. Your life doesn't have to follow the narrative arc everyone expects. We're told there's a certain path: school, career, milestones at specific ages, achievements that validate your existence. And when your life doesn't look like that timeline, it's easy to feel like you've failed some invisible test. But life isn't linear. It's not a straight line from birth to accomplishment to legacy. It's messier than that. It's circular. It doubles back. It has chapters that don't seem to connect until years later, when you look back and see the pattern. Some people find their purpose at 25, others at 55. Some people have one clear calling. Others have several small ones scattered across decades. None of these paths is more valid than the others. What matters isn't the shape your calling takes. It's whether you're listening when it speaks. And that requires something our culture doesn't often teach us: stillness. We live in a world that equates productivity with worth. Every moment must be optimized, scheduled, tracked. We listen to podcasts while cooking. We answer emails while watching our children play. We scroll through headlines while waiting for the coffee to brew. This constant motion creates a specific kind of exhaustion. Not just physical tiredness, but a deeper depletion. We become strangers to our own inner lives. The voice of purpose can't compete with this noise. It doesn't shout. It doesn't send notifications. It emerges in the spaces between tasks, in moments when your mind is allowed to wander without agenda. This is why some people discover their calling while walking, others while swimming or gardening or lying in bed just before sleep. The activity itself isn't what matters. What matters is that these are times when the constant input finally stops. Your mind, given space, begins to sort itself. Thoughts you didn't know you were having rise to the surface. Patterns you couldn't see become obvious. Questions you've been avoiding finally get asked. This isn't meditation necessarily, though meditation can serve this purpose. It's simply unstructured time. Minutes or hours when you're not consuming content, not solving problems, not performing any role. For many of us, this kind of time feels indulgent, wasteful even. We've internalized the message that every moment should produce something measurable, but here's what's actually wasteful. Spending decades on a path you never truly chose because you never gave yourself time to ask what you actually wanted. The answers are already inside you. They've been there all along, but they exist in a quiet register, easily drowned out by everything else demanding your attention. Building time for stillness isn't selfish. It's necessary, not just for finding purpose, but for maintaining your connection to it once you've found it. Because purpose isn't a destination you reach and then coast toward forever. It's a relationship you have to tend. And like any relationship, it requires presence. That's why the fourth practice matters so much. Regular reflection, not obsessive self-interrogation, not ruthless productivity audits, just pausing, checking in. I think about a doctor I know who keeps what she calls her compass journal. Once a month, she sits down with a cup of tea and asks herself 3 questions. What felt meaningful this month? What felt hollow? Where am I being called? She doesn't always have clear answers. Sometimes she writes, I don't know, but something feels off. Sometimes she writes, more of this, please. The practice isn't about achieving clarity every single time. It's about maintaining the relationship. It's about not sleepwalking through your days so long that you wake up 5 years later and realize you've been walking in the wrong direction. Because here's what I've learned. Purpose drift is real. You can start with the clearest sense of direction, the most aligned choices, the deepest conviction, and then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the current can carry you sideways. Not dramatically, not obviously, just gradually. You take a project because it pays well, even though it doesn't light you up. You say yes to an opportunity because you should, even though your gut whispers no. You stop making time for the things that feed your soul because, well, you're busy. And none of these choices individually is a crisis, but cumulatively, they add up, they compound. Reflection is how you catch the drift before it becomes a canyon. It's how you notice that the job that once felt aligned now feels like a cage, that the relationship that once felt nourishing now feels draining, that the version of success you're chasing isn't actually yours anymore. And when you notice, you get to choose again, not abandon everything, not blow up your life, but recalibrate, adjust, come back to center. Maybe that means having a hard conversation. Maybe it means setting a new boundary. Maybe it means admitting this isn't working anymore, and that's okay. The courage isn't in never drifting, it's in being willing to notice when you do. Because the people who maintain a sense of purpose over decades aren't the ones who get it perfect from the start. They're the ones who keep checking in, who keep adjusting, who keep asking, is this still true for me? And when it stops being true, they have the courage to change direction, not dramatically, not with some crisis or breakdown, just quietly, intentionally, like adjusting the sails when the wind shifts. Because growth isn't always forward motion. Sometimes it's lateral. Sometimes it's circular. Sometimes it looks like going backward until you realize you're actually spiraling upward, revisiting old places from a new altitude. The people who grow old gracefully understand something that took me years to grasp. You don't have to become a completely different person to evolve. You don't have to reject who you were to become who you're becoming. You can love the same things you loved at 20 and still be completely transformed. You can carry your younger selves with you, not as baggage, but as chapters in a book that keeps getting more interesting. I think about my grandmother, who at 75 still laughed at the same silly jokes that made her giggle as a girl. But the woman who laughed was different, deeper, more textured. She'd been shaped by loss and love and ordinary Tuesdays that somehow added up to a life. She hadn't abandoned her younger self, she'd integrated her. And that's what graceful aging really is, integration. Bringing all your pieces together instead of leaving them scattered across the years. The person you were at 17, full of raw hope and terrible poetry. The version of you at 26 who thought they had it figured out. The you at 35 who realized how little you actually knew. the 42-year-old who finally started trusting their own voice. They're all still here, all still part of the story. Graceful aging means you don't have to choose between wisdom and wonder. You can have both. You can be both the person who knows better and the person who's still curious enough to try anyway. You can hold complexity, contradictions. You can be tired and hopeful, disillusioned and still believing, aware of how hard things are and still looking for beauty. Because here's what nobody tells you about getting older. You don't become simpler. You become more nuanced, more capable of holding multiple truths at once, more comfortable with the fact that most things don't have clean answers. The people who age with grace, they've made peace with ambiguity. They don't need everything to be resolved. They don't need every question answered. They can live in the tension between knowing and not knowing, between certainty and doubt. They've learned that ambiguity isn't the enemy of truth, it's often where truth lives most authentically. Think about the most profound experiences in your life: the birth of a child, the loss of someone you loved, a moment of unexpected beauty that stopped you in your tracks. Could you fully explain any of those experiences? Could you capture them completely in words, tie them up neatly with a logical bow? Of course not, because life's most meaningful moments exist in a space beyond complete comprehension. They're felt more than understood, they're experienced more than explained. And the people who thrive aren't the ones who avoid these experiences because they can't be neatly categorized. They're the ones who lean into them, who allow themselves to feel without needing to fully understand. There's a Japanese concept called ma. It refers to the space between things, the pause between notes in music, the emptiness in a room that gives the furniture meaning, the silence between words that makes conversation possible. Western thinking often treats these spaces as voids to be filled, problems to be solved. But what if the space itself is essential? What if the not knowing is just as important as the knowing? Intellectual humility means recognizing that some of the most important things exist in that space. Love exists there. Meaning exists there. Beauty exists there. You can't logic your way to understanding why a particular piece of music moves you to tears. You can't reason your way to feeling connected to another person. You can't think your way into experiencing awe. These things require a different kind of knowing, one that embraces uncertainty, that accepts limitation, that finds comfort in the unknowable. And here's what's beautiful. When you stop trying to force everything into neat categories, when you stop demanding that every question have a clear answer, you actually become more capable of genuine understanding. Because you're no longer filtering everything through your need to be right. You're no longer distorting reality to fit your existing framework. You're actually seeing what's there in all its messy, complicated, contradictory glory. You become like a clear pool of water instead of a distorting mirror. Reality can reflect in you more accurately because you're not constantly rippling with the need to impose your interpretations. This is the paradox at the heart of intellectual humility. The less you claim to know with certainty, the more you actually understand. And this understanding changes how you engage with everything. When you pick up a book now, you're not just extracting information to add to your collection of certainties. You're entering a conversation with another mind, aware that the author sees angles you've missed, understands context you've never experienced. Even when you disagree, you do so differently, not as someone proving their rightness, but as someone exploring the boundaries where your understanding meets theirs. I think about how this transforms disagreements. Most arguments are just competing monologues, two people waiting for their turn to reassert what they already believe. But when you approach conversation with genuine intellectual humility, something shifts. You start asking questions that aren't rhetorical traps. You actually listen to understand rather than to identify the weak points in their reasoning. And here's what's strange. You often end up learning something, even from people who are fundamentally wrong about the main point, because wrongness isn't binary. Someone can be incorrect about their conclusion but insightful about the underlying dynamics. They can be misguided in their solution but absolutely right about the problem. Intellectual humility lets you harvest wisdom from imperfect sources, including your past self. It also changes how you hold your identity. When your sense of self is built on being right, you become brittle. Every challenge to your beliefs feels like a personal attack because you've welded your ego to your opinions. But when you build your identity around curiosity instead, around the willingness to update and evolve, you become anti-fragile. Challenges strengthen you rather than threaten you. Being wrong becomes interesting rather than humiliating. This doesn't mean abandoning conviction. You can hold strong beliefs while remaining intellectually humble. The difference is you hold them lightly, aware they're your current best understanding rather than absolute truth. You're willing to defend them, but you're also willing to let them evolve when better evidence appears. This is why the most intellectually humble people often appear confident, not uncertain. They've done the work. They've examined the evidence. They've considered alternatives. Their confidence comes not from refusing to question themselves, but from having already done so thoroughly. There's a researcher named Julia Gallup who distinguishes between two mindsets, the soldier and the scout. The soldier's job is to defend territory, to protect your beliefs from threats. The scout's job is to understand the terrain as accurately as possible, even if you don't like what you find. Most of us live in soldier mindset most of the time. We treat ideas that threaten our beliefs as enemies to be defeated. We look for flaws in opposing arguments and strengths in supporting ones. We feel threatened when someone disagrees with us because we've made our beliefs part of our identity. Scout mindset is different. It's curious rather than defensive. It asks, what's true, instead of, how can I prove I'm right? It treats being wrong as information rather than failure. And here's what's interesting, people in scout mindset are generally happier. That might seem counterintuitive. Wouldn't it be more comfortable to just believe you're right all the time? But think about what soldier mindset requires. Constant vigilance, endless defense. The anxiety of protecting ideas you secretly suspect might not hold up. The exhaustion of maintaining certainty in an uncertain world. Scout mindset is lighter. You can relax. You don't have to defend every position or win every argument. You can say I don't know without feeling diminished. You can change your mind without shame. You can learn something new without it threatening who you are. This doesn't mean you become wishy-washy or uncommitted. Scouts still make decisions. They still take stands. But they do so from a position of curiosity rather than defensiveness. The shift from soldier to scout is gradual. You notice when you're getting defensive. You ask yourself why an idea threatens you. You practice separating your beliefs from your identity. You reward yourself for updating your thinking rather than punishing yourself for being wrong. Over time, you build what psychologists call a growth mindset around your own knowledge. Your intelligence isn't fixed, it expands. Your understanding isn't complete, it develops. Your beliefs aren't permanent, they evolve. And the most powerful thing you can do? Create an environment where growth mindset thrives naturally. Start small. Notice when you use fixed mindset language, I'm not good at this. I'll never understand this. That's just how I am. Then translate it. I'm not good at this yet. I haven't figured out how to understand this. This is how I've been, but I'm changing. That one word yet transforms everything. It turns a period into an ellipsis. It opens a door that seemed permanently sealed. Surround yourself with growth-minded people. Not toxic positivity merchants who deny reality, but people who see obstacles as interesting problems, setbacks as valuable data, and limitations as starting points rather than endpoints. Celebrate effort and strategy, not just results. When you accomplish something, don't just bask in the success, analyze the process. What worked? What didn't? What would you do differently next time? This trains your brain to value learning over performance, growth over validation. Share your struggles openly. When you hide your challenges and only showcase your victories, you reinforce the myth that successful people don't struggle, they just have innate talent. But when you normalize effort, when you make struggle visible, you give others permission to grow too. And here's something most people miss. Growth mindset isn't just about you, it's about how you see others. When someone fails or struggles, do you label them they're not cut out for this, or do you see potential, they haven't developed this skill yet? When someone succeeds, do you attribute it to fixed traits, they're naturally talented, or acknowledge the process, they work strategically and persistently? The mindset you apply to others shapes the world you live in. If you see everyone's intelligence and abilities as fixed, you live in a rigid, limiting world. If you see potential everywhere, you live in a world of possibility. Think about the people who believed in your potential before you did. The teacher who saw something in you that you couldn't see in yourself. The mentor who insisted you were capable of more. The friend who refused to let you define yourself by your worst moments. They weren't delusional. They weren't ignoring your limitations. They were seeing something real, your capacity to grow, to change, to become more than you currently are. Now be that person for others. And more importantly, be that person for yourself. Because here's the truth that changes everything. You are not discovering who you are. You are deciding who you become. That decision doesn't happen once. It happens every morning when you choose what thoughts to feed, every evening when you review your day and decide what it meant, every moment when you encounter discomfort and choose whether to lean in or pull away. Think about water and stone. Water doesn't defeat stone through force, it defeats it through consistency. One drop does nothing. 1,000 drops do nothing visible. But 1,000,000 drops, falling on the same spot day after day, year after year, will carve through solid rock. Your daily choices are those drops. Your morning routine, your response to frustration, the way you talk to yourself when no one's listening. These aren't just habits, they're sculptors, and you are both the stone and the water. I learned this the hard way. There was a period where I was waiting to feel motivated before I started, waiting to feel confident before I tried, waiting to feel worthy before I asked. I was treating my future like a package being delivered, something that would just show up if I waited long enough. But nothing showed up, because I had it backwards. You don't wait for the feeling and then take action. You take the action and then the feeling follows. Confidence doesn't create behavior. Behavior creates confidence. The person you want to become isn't on the other side of some grand transformation. They're on the other side of today's choice, then tomorrow's choice, then the next one. And here's what makes this both terrifying and liberating. No single choice feels important enough. Skipping one workout won't ruin your health. Breaking one promise won't destroy your character. Telling yourself one lie won't shatter your integrity. But that's exactly how people lose themselves. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 tiny compromises. Death by 1,000 cuts, except it's not death. It's something worse. It's becoming someone you don't recognize while still being alive. The reverse is also true. One kind word won't heal all your relationships. One honest conversation won't fix everything. One day of discipline won't transform your life, but 1,000 kind words will change how people feel around you. 100 honest conversations will rebuild trust. 365 days of discipline will completely reshape your reality. This is the mathematics of transformation. Small actions multiplied by consistency raised to the power of time. The compound effect doesn't just apply to your habits, it applies to your reputation. Every interaction you have with another person is making a deposit or a withdrawal from your social capital account. The colleague you helped without expecting anything in return. The promise you kept when it would have been easier to break it. The time you admitted you were wrong instead of defending a position you knew was indefensible. These moments seem insignificant in isolation, but over time they create a reputation that precedes you. People begin to describe you with words like reliable and trustworthy and someone who does what they say they'll do. And that reputation becomes one of your most valuable assets. It opens doors that would otherwise remain closed. It creates opportunities that would otherwise go to someone else. I watched this happen with a woman I know named Jennifer. She worked in a competitive industry where connections and visibility seemed to be everything. But Jennifer took a different approach. Instead of networking aggressively or self-promoting constantly, she focused on being genuinely helpful. When someone asked for advice, she gave thoughtful, detailed responses. When she said she'd follow up, she actually did. When she made an introduction, she took time to explain why both parties would benefit from knowing each other. For years, it seemed like this strategy wasn't paying off. More aggressive networkers appeared to be getting ahead faster. But Jennifer kept making deposits in her reputation account. Small acts of integrity, day after day, year after year. Then something shifted. People started seeking her out specifically because they knew she was someone who added value rather than just extracting it. Decision makers began including her in important conversations because they trusted her judgment. Opportunities came to her instead of her having to chase them. Her career trajectory changed completely, not because of one big break, but because of thousands of small interactions that built a foundation of trust. That's the compound effect applied to relationships. That's what happens when you realize that your reputation is being built in every moment, whether you're paying attention or not. The most successful people I've studied don't think about their reputation as something they manage once in a while. They think about it as something they create every single day, in every single interaction. It's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent with who you say you are. I remember reading about a CEO who had a simple rule. He would respond to every email from an employee within 24 hours, even if it was just to say, "Got this. We'll get back to you by Friday." Sounds basic, right? But in an organization of thousands of people, this small habit created a reputation for accessibility that shaped the entire culture. Employees felt heard. They felt valued, and that feeling cascaded through every level of the company. He wasn't doing anything revolutionary. He was just being consistent with the value he claimed to hold, that everyone's voice matters. And over time, that consistency became his reputation. That reputation became his brand. That brand became one of the reasons talented people wanted to work there. This is where most people get stuck. They think they need to do something extraordinary to build a strong reputation. They wait for the big moment, the grand gesture, the viral success, but they miss the 1,000 small opportunities right in front of them. The person who remembers names, the colleague who always returns the borrowed pen, the friend who shows up when they say they will. These aren't small things. These are the things that define you. Your reputation is the story other people tell about you when you're not in the room. And that story is being written right now in real time based on patterns they've observed, not based on your intentions, not based on who you think you are, based on what you consistently do. I want you to think about someone you deeply respect. Got someone in mind? Now ask yourself, why do you respect them? I'm willing to bet it's not because of one impressive achievement. It's because of a pattern. They're consistently kind, or consistently honest, or consistently reliable. That pattern became their identity in your mind. That's reputation. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You also have patterns, and other people are noticing them, even when you think no one's paying attention. Especially when you think no one's paying attention. Your friend who always forgets their wallet. Your colleague who somehow never makes it to the morning meetings but is mysteriously present for every free lunch. That family member who only calls when they need something. You've noticed. Everyone's noticed. They just think no one has. And that's the terrifying part about patterns. They're like footprints in snow. You might not be looking at the ground, but anyone who walks behind you can see exactly where you've been, can trace your entire journey, can predict where you're probably headed next. I know someone who would complain about being broke every single week, but somehow always had money for concert tickets. Every time. Without fail. It became a joke among the friend group, but never to her face. Because that's what we do. We notice the patterns, we talk about them privately, but we let people keep believing their inconsistencies are invisible. Your patterns are your reputation's rough draft. They're writing the story of who you are before you even open your mouth to defend yourself, before you get the chance to explain, before you can offer context or justification. And here's what makes this even more unsettling. Patterns have compound interest. Each repetition doesn't just add to the pile, it multiplies the previous instances. The first time you're late, it's an incident. The third time, it's becoming a thing. The 10th time, it's just who you are now. It's your defining characteristic. It's what people warn others about before introducing you. The pattern becomes more real than your intentions, more powerful than your excuses, more defining than whatever you think you're actually about. Think about the person who always has drama in their life. Always. Every week there's a new crisis, a new betrayal, a new impossible situation. And at first you're sympathetic. You listen. You support. But after the 15th crisis, after the pattern becomes undeniable, you start to wonder. You start to realize that maybe they're not unlucky. Maybe they're the common denominator. Maybe they're the pattern. And that's when the real discomfort sets in. Because if they're the pattern, then what does that say about you? You've been listening to their stories for years, nodding sympathetically, offering advice they never take, watching them make the same mistakes with different people, in different cities, with different jobs that all somehow end the same way. You've been the sounding board, the shoulder to cry on, the person who validates their version of events without question. Because that's what good friends do, right? We support each other. We believe each other. We stand by each other even when the whole world seems against them. Except, what if the whole world isn't against them? What if the world is just responding to them? What if all those people who supposedly wronged them were actually just defending themselves, setting boundaries, asking for basic respect, expecting reciprocity in a relationship that had become entirely one-sided? This is the question that keeps you up at night, because recognizing that they're the problem forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth about yourself. You've been enabling it, not maliciously, not consciously, but enabling it nonetheless. Every time you listened without challenging, every time you agreed that yes, their boss was definitely the problem, their ex was definitely crazy, their friend was definitely jealous, every time you provided sympathy without accountability, you were reinforcing their narrative. You were helping them build the walls of their victim prison, brick by brick, story by story. And maybe that's why they keep you around. Not because you're such a great friend, but because you're a great audience. You're the person who will always believe their version of events, who will always take their side, who will never ask the hard questions or point out the inconsistencies in their story. You're not a friend. You're a mirror that only shows them what they want to see. And they've surrounded themselves with mirrors, haven't they? Everyone in their life plays the same role. Listen, sympathize, validate, repeat. Anyone who breaks that pattern, anyone who dares to suggest that maybe, just maybe, they might be part of the problem, well, they become the next villain in the story. And what's truly fascinating is how this creates a kind of emotional monopoly. In a healthy relationship, emotional currency flows both ways. Today I support you through your crisis. Tomorrow you support me through mine. There's reciprocity, balance, a mutual understanding that we're both complex humans navigating difficult lives. But the professional victim operates on a different economic system entirely. They've cornered the market on suffering. They're the Federal Reserve of emotional pain, printing crisis after crisis, inflating the currency until everyone else's struggles become worthless by comparison. You lost your job? They've been unemployed for 6 months and nobody understands how hard it is. Your relationship is struggling? Their partner is a monster who never appreciates anything they do. You're feeling overwhelmed? They're on the verge of a complete breakdown and barely holding it together. It's not a conversation anymore. It's a competitive sport where the gold medal goes to whoever can claim the most suffering. And here's the insidious part: they've convinced everyone around them that this is what compassion looks like, that if you're not constantly deferring to their pain, constantly centering their experience, constantly making space for their crisis, then you're the one being selfish. I've watched friendships disintegrate under this weight. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. People just quietly fade away. They stop calling, stop making plans, stop being available. Because they've finally done the math and realized that this isn't a friendship, it's an unpaid emotional labor position with no benefits and no possibility of advancement. But here's what makes these relationships so hard to leave: the guilt. The professional victim is a master at deploying guilt like a tactical weapon. If you try to establish boundaries, you're abandoning them in their time of need. If you suggest therapy, you're saying their feelings aren't valid. If you simply need some space to deal with your own life, you're proving that nobody really cares about them after all. The exhausting part is that you can see glimpses of self-awareness. They'll occasionally acknowledge that they're being difficult, that they know they're pushing you away, that they recognize the pattern, and for a moment you feel hope. Maybe this is the breakthrough. Maybe now things can change. But that self-awareness never translates into different behavior. It's just another layer of the performance. They recognize the pattern just enough to narrate it, to add commentary, but never enough to actually interrupt it. It's like watching someone describe in perfect detail how they're about to step off a cliff, and then watching them do it anyway, and then comforting them when they're surprised by the fall. And they've trained you over time to participate in this cycle. You've learned that certain topics are landmines. You've learned which phrases will trigger an episode. You've learned to soften your language, to preface everything with reassurance, to walk on eggshells that they've carefully distributed across every inch of the relationship. You've also learned that your own struggles need to be smaller, that your problems need to take up less space. Because when you're dealing with someone whose needs are always critical, always urgent, always life or death, your regular human difficulties start to feel selfish to even mention. You had a bad day at work? Well, they're having an existential crisis about whether life has meaning. You're feeling overwhelmed by responsibilities? They're contemplating whether anyone would even notice if they disappeared. There's no room for your moderate difficulties when they're constantly operating at maximum crisis level. And perhaps the cruelest part is how they'll accuse you of the very thing they're doing to you. They'll tell you that you make everything about yourself, that you never really listen, that you're emotionally unavailable. They'll describe with startling accuracy exactly what it feels like to be in a relationship with them, except they'll cast themselves as the victim of these behaviors rather than the perpetrator. And here's the truly disorienting part. They believe it. When they describe their ex as controlling, they genuinely feel controlled by having been held accountable. When they call someone manipulative, they're genuinely experiencing the discomfort of someone not accepting their manipulation. Their perception of victimhood is authentic to them, even though the reality is inverted. This is why mutual friends often struggle to reconcile different accounts of the same relationship. One person describes feeling suffocated by someone who demanded all their time and attention. The other person describes feeling abandoned by someone who was never emotionally present. Both stories contain truth, but they're describing the same dynamic from opposite sides of a distorting mirror. The demanding behavior was actually reactive, desperate attempts to get basic emotional connection from someone who was perpetually unavailable. You'll notice this pattern extends beyond romantic relationships. Their work complaints follow the same structure. Every boss who sets boundaries is a tyrant. Every colleague who doesn't cover for them is unsupportive. Every company that enforces reasonable standards is toxic. The common denominator, always conveniently obscured, is them. And perhaps what makes this so particularly insidious is that it prevents growth. Because if you're always the victim, you never have to change. If every relationship failure is something that happened to you rather than something you participated in creating, there's no impetus for self-examination. The lesson they extract from a string of failed relationships isn't, maybe I need to work on myself, it's people are terrible, and I just keep getting unlucky. This is the real tragedy of the perpetual victim narrative. It's not just that it obscures responsibility, it's that it creates a prison of repetition. The same patterns play out again and again, with only the names and faces changing because the script never gets rewritten. And that's the tragedy of it all. We become actors in a play we never auditioned for, reading lines we didn't write, wondering why the story never seems to change. The generational trauma becomes generational theatre, and every new generation walks onto the same stage, under the same lights, with the same broken props. I've watched families repeat cycles for decades. The daughter who swore she'd never be like her mother, now using the exact same phrases, the same tone, the same emotional manipulation tactics she once despised. The son who promised he'd be different, finding himself in the same arguments his father had, wielding silence like a weapon just as it was wielded against him. It's not genetic, it's learned. But it feels genetic because we learned it so young, so thoroughly, that it became part of our operating system. We think it's who we are when really, it's just what we were taught. The real work of healing isn't just about understanding your parents. It's about understanding that you can write a different script, that you can take the stage and improvise something new, that the play doesn't have to end the way it's always ended. But here's what makes it hard. Breaking the pattern feels like betrayal. There's a strange loyalty we carry to our family's way of doing things, even when that way is dysfunctional. To change feels like saying they were wrong. And if they were wrong, then all that suffering, all those years, all those sacrifices, what were they for? This is the bind that keeps people stuck. They'd rather continue the pattern than face the possibility that it could have been different all along. Because if it could have been different, then what does that say about the choices that were made? What does it say about the pain that was inflicted? So they hold on. They pass it down. They tell themselves it's tradition, it's culture, it's just how their family is. They make the dysfunction into an identity, something to be defended rather than examined. And the cycle continues, smooth and unbroken, like a river that's worn its channel so deep it no longer remembers there were other paths it could have taken. This is why breaking the pattern feels so disorienting. You're not just changing behavior, you're changing the story your family has been telling itself for generations. You're saying that the river can flow in a different direction, that the channel isn't carved in stone but in earth, and earth can be reshaped, and your family will resist this with everything they have. Not because they're evil, but because you're threatening the only map they know. You're suggesting that the landmarks they've used to navigate their entire lives might be pointing in the wrong direction. That's terrifying. It's easier to call you ungrateful than to consider that gratitude shouldn't require self-erasure, so they'll use guilt. They'll remind you of every sacrifice they made, every hardship they endured, as if your healing somehow dishonors their suffering, as if the only way to validate their pain is to inherit it, to carry it forward like a sacred burden that must never be set down. But here's what they don't understand. Honoring someone's struggle doesn't mean repeating their mistakes. You can acknowledge everything they went through while still refusing to accept that their wound should become your destiny. You can say, I see how hard it was for you, without adding, and therefore I'll make it hard for myself too. The guilt they wield is often a proxy for their own unexplored shame. They feel guilty for what they put you through, guilty for repeating what was done to them, guilty for not knowing better or doing better. But rather than face that guilt directly, they redirect it. They make you feel guilty for pointing out the problem, for having the audacity to want something different. It's a clever inversion. You become the problem for naming the problem. You're selfish for having boundaries. You're divisive for asking to be treated with respect. You're destroying the family by refusing to participate in the behaviors that were actually destroying you. And here's the brutal irony: the people who accuse you of being divisive are often the ones who divided the family long ago. They just did it quietly, with golden children and scapegoats, with favorites and forgotten ones, with conditional love that kept everyone competing for scraps of approval. You didn't divide anything. You just stopped pretending the division wasn't already there. You stopped performing unity while being excluded. You stopped faking closeness with people who only called when they needed something. You stopped showing up to gatherings where you were either ignored or targeted, then blamed for ruining the event by looking uncomfortable. The family was already broken. You just stopped hiding the cracks. And when you do that, when you stop being the spackle that holds a fractured system together, people panic, because your silence was structural. Your compliance was load-bearing. You weren't just a person in that family. You were a function, a role, a pressure valve, and when you remove yourself, the whole system has to reorganize around your absence. Suddenly there's no one to blame, no one to vent on, no one to unite against. The scapegoat is gone, and now everyone has to look at each other and at themselves without the distraction you provided. That's terrifying for them. So they come after you. They tell you you're holding grudges. They say you're too sensitive, too proud, too stubborn to forgive. They frame your healing as hostility, your boundaries as punishment, your peace as pettiness. But you're not punishing anyone. You're just no longer absorbing their dysfunction. And to someone who depended on you to do that, it feels the same. Let me say this clearly. You are not responsible for managing other people's guilt. If your absence makes someone uncomfortable, that discomfort is information. It's telling them something about how they treated you. That's not your burden to resolve. That's theirs. Your only job is to protect your peace, not to make your healing convenient for the people who hurt you. Because the moment you start managing other people's emotions during your healing, you stop healing. You become a performer again. And that's exactly what they're counting on, consciously or not. They want your healing to look like forgiveness wrapped in a bow. They want your boundaries to come with apologies attached. They want your growth to happen quietly, privately, where it doesn't make them uncomfortable or force them to examine their own behavior. But real healing is messy. It's saying no without explanation. It's choosing yourself even when it disappoints others. It's walking away mid-conversation because you recognize a pattern you're no longer willing to tolerate. It's blocking numbers, declining invitations, leaving family events early. And yes, sometimes it's cutting people off completely without the closure they think they deserve. Because here's what they don't tell you about closure. You don't owe it to anyone. Closure is something you give yourself. It's an internal process, not a conversation you're required to have with someone who's already proven they don't respect your boundaries. You don't need their permission to move on. You don't need their understanding to validate your experience. You don't need their acknowledgement to make your pain real. Your truth doesn't require their agreement. And I know that's hard, especially when it's family, especially when it's someone you loved, especially when they're telling everyone their version of the story and painting you as the villain for protecting yourself. Let them. Your reputation among people who don't know you, don't respect you, or don't want to understand you is not your responsibility. The people who matter will either understand or they'll ask, and the ones who've already made up their minds, they were never your people to begin with, because real relationships don't punish you for healing. They don't require you to minimize your experience to make others comfortable. They don't ask you to be smaller so they can feel bigger. Real love celebrates your growth even when it's inconvenient, even when it changes the dynamic, even when it means you're no longer available for the role you used to play. Because I think that's what scares us most about toxic love. It requires us to stay small. It needs us to be manageable, predictable, contained. And when we start to exceed those boundaries, when we start to become more than the narrow role someone assigned us, the relationship can't hold us anymore. I knew someone who finally went back to school after years of putting it off. She'd always wanted to finish her degree, always talked about it with this quiet longing. And when she finally enrolled, her partner's reaction wasn't pride or excitement, it was resentment disguised as concern. Suddenly every assignment was taking time away from us. Every study session was proof she didn't care about the relationship anymore. What should have been celebrated became a threat, because her growth meant she was investing in herself. It meant she was building a future that didn't depend entirely on him. And in a relationship built on her dependence, her smallness, her availability, that growth felt like abandonment to him. Real love doesn't do that. Real love says, you're learning something new. Tell me about it. You're discovering parts of yourself you didn't know existed. I want to witness that. Real love understands that when you grow, the relationship doesn't shrink, it expands to hold more of who you're becoming. But toxic love operates from scarcity. It believes there's only so much of you to go around, and anything you give to yourself is something stolen from them. It can't see growth as mutual, elevation only as personal loss. And here's what I've learned through all of this. Through every painful lesson and hard-won realization, recognizing these differences isn't about judging yourself for past choices. It's not about beating yourself up for staying too long or loving too deeply or believing too hard that things could change. You weren't naive. You weren't foolish. You were human. And being human means sometimes we confuse intensity for intimacy. Sometimes we mistake someone's need for us with actual love. Sometimes we stay because leaving feels like giving up, and we were taught that love means never giving up. But here's what they don't tell you. Knowing when to leave isn't giving up, it's waking up. It's recognizing that some relationships aren't meant to teach us about love, they're meant to teach us about ourselves, about our patterns, our wounds, the places where we still confuse pain with passion or chaos with chemistry. And yes, that distinction can be incredibly hard to see when you're in it, because toxic relationships don't announce themselves. They don't walk up and say, "Hi, I'm going to systematically erode your sense of self while making you feel like you can't live without me." They start with excitement, with intensity, with someone who seems to understand you in ways no one else ever has, with conversations that last until 3 in the morning and connections that feel electric, almost fated. But then, slowly, so slowly you barely notice, the script starts to shift. The person who couldn't get enough of you starts to pull away, just enough to keep you reaching. The one who made you feel so special starts to make you feel like you have to earn that feeling. The relationship that felt like coming home starts to feel like a test you're constantly failing. And you tell yourself it's just a rough patch, that all relationships go through phases, that if you just love them harder, communicate better, try more, things will go back to how they were in the beginning. But here's the truth that no one wants to hear. The beginning wasn't real, or rather, it was real, but it wasn't sustainable. It was the preview, not the movie, the trailer that shows all the best parts, edited to look like a cohesive whole. The real relationship, the one you're in now, this is the movie. And if the movie requires you to shrink, to silence yourself, to constantly monitor your words and actions to avoid triggering an explosion or a withdrawal, then it's not a love story. It's a survival story. And you deserve more than just surviving your own relationship. You deserve a love that feels like expansion, not contraction, like possibility, not prison, like peace, not performance. And here's what I want you to understand about that kind of love: it exists. Not in fairy tales, not in movies, in real life, in quiet moments, in ordinary days. I've seen it in the couple who've been married 40 years and still laugh at each other's terrible jokes, in the friend who shows up with soup when you're sick without being asked, in the partner who says you seem stressed, what do you need? Instead of making your mood about them. This kind of love doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It reveals itself in consistency, in showing up, in choosing each other even when it's not exciting, even when it's hard, even when the initial rush has settled into something steadier and more sustainable. The love you deserve doesn't require you to be perfect. It doesn't demand that you hide your struggles or apologize for having needs. It doesn't ask you to shrink so someone else can feel bigger. It meets you where you are. It sees your growth and celebrates it instead of feeling threatened by it. It understands that loving you doesn't mean owning you, controlling you, or consuming you. Real love creates space. Space for both people to breathe, to grow, to have bad days, to be fully human. It doesn't mistake intensity for intimacy or jealousy for passion. It knows the difference between connection and codependence. And I know what some of you might be thinking. But what if I've never seen that kind of love? What if I don't even know what it looks like in practice? Then you get to define it. You get to be the one who breaks the pattern. You get to decide that just because you haven't experienced it yet doesn't mean you don't deserve it. You get to be the person who shows up differently, who loves differently, who refuses to accept crumbs and call it a feast, who understands that being alone and at peace is infinitely better than being with someone and constantly anxious. Because the truth is, you can't build a healthy relationship from an unhealthy place. You can't create security with someone who makes you feel uncertain. You can't find peace with someone who keeps you in chaos. The work starts with you, with understanding what you truly need, not just what feels familiar, with recognizing your patterns and choosing differently, with believing deep in your bones that you are worthy of the love you've been giving everyone else. Because here's what happens when you start to believe that. Everything shifts, not overnight, not in some dramatic movie montage where you suddenly become a different person, but gradually, quietly, in ways that matter more than you might realize at first. You start noticing when someone's words don't match their actions. And instead of making excuses for them, instead of filling in the gaps with your own hope and effort, you simply observe. You let reality be what it is, not what you wish it could be. You start feeling that familiar pull to fix someone, to save them, to prove your worth through their transformation. But this time you pause. You recognize the pattern. You remember what it cost you last time, and you choose yourself instead. You start hearing those old voices, the ones that say you're too much, too needy, too sensitive, asking for too much. But now they sound different, distant, like echoes from a life you used to live, not truths about who you are. You start attracting different kinds of people, not because you've changed who you are fundamentally, but because you've changed what you'll tolerate, because you've raised the bar, because you finally understand that standards aren't about being difficult, they're about self-respect. And yes, some people will fall away. Some relationships that you thought were solid will reveal themselves as conditional. Some people who loved your caretaking won't love your boundaries. Some situations that felt like home will start feeling like prison. Let them go. Not with bitterness, not with anger or resentment, but with clarity, with gratitude for what they taught you, even if the lesson was painful, with understanding that some people are only meant to be in your life for a chapter, not the whole story. Because holding on to relationships that require you to diminish yourself isn't love, it's self-abandonment with company. Real love, the kind that actually nourishes you, doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't require you to earn it through performance or proof. It doesn't keep you guessing or walking on eggshells or wondering if today's the day they'll finally see your worth. Real love is steady. It's consistent. It shows up not just when it's convenient, but when it matters.